Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please look us up on your favorite podcast app, subscribe, like, and share so that you never miss an episode. If you'd like to further support us, visit patreon.com/speakingout and check out the different rewards. You'll find exclusive rewards if you sign up as a patron of the podcast. Thank you for your support, and let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast. Thank you again to our patrons who make the podcast possible. As a reminder, as always, we have different tiers, different rewards. We just finished doing a live Q&A, live question and answer.
Come on here.
So we spent time. We had phenomenal questions, really.
We
really
did,
good
and a
discussion
great
with our
group of
patrons.
people on with us.
Yep.
So it was awesome.
So we
Really
have
good.
that at the 15 and up tier. We have a monthly Zoom, a live Zoom training on abuse prevention and recognition. We have a book club once a month
Yes.
where we discuss
love
chapters
that.
out of my book. So we have lots of stuff to offer. Sign up. Go to patreon.com/speakingout. Whew, life is like a box of chocolates.
Sure is.
You never know what you're going to get. Since last week, we talked about grief. And yes, we know Granny's microphone was off.
Granny didn't
We know it now. We didn't know it
I
then.
just found out today.
Because
Did not-
somebody
did not-
over here on quality control didn't
Yes.
do a proper
Ooh,
mic check.
James.
So that's my fault.
We
my
have
bad.
everything working today.
We do.
Yes.
So we want to talk about grief again because we can't get
Right.
away from the subject. We are going to develop a course very soon on how to walk people through the process of grieving. And that's all different kinds of grief, from child loss to losing another loved one to loss of a job, loss of relationships.
Health, loss of
In our
finances.
Q&A today, loss of a church, loss of church
right.
community. On and on and on
Right.
and on. I mean, grief hits us in all kinds of ways. And let me tell you, since the new year, it's been hitting hard. And so I told Granny here just a couple minutes ago, I said, I have this perfect metaphor for my life. And this metaphor is my mailbox.
I just love this. I'm
I'm a
sorry.
walking mailbox.
I laughed so hard.
My life is a mailbox.
Yes, it is.
Let me tell you about this mailbox. So we buy this house. We bought it a while ago. We bought it in 2009, so we've been here a while. And we have this mailbox that's like cheap. It's leaning the leaning mailbox of Plaza. Like it's just kind of hanging out there. You can grab the thing and wiggle it. It's ugly. It's this ugly mailbox, and so we kept it for a couple years. And finally, I was like, you know what? We should get a new mailbox and put it in right. And put it up to the proper height so our mail lady doesn't have to reach up here. So we go. And I'm a handyman, so I order the parts and get the concrete and get a post hole digger. So we dig it, pour concrete, put a level on the post, put it in, do it all right.
You did
we
it
did
first
it right.
class, I'm telling you.
We did it right.
You did.
I mean, not to brag or anything, but
A job well done, James.
we did it right.
Yes.
And a couple months goes by, 2-3 months goes by. I come out one day and here's our mailbox sitting like this, and I'm like, huh. Then I look, and there are these skid marks that start up the street, like way up the street, and it's a 35-mile-an-hour zone through here, and they start way up the street, veer into our driveway, just perfectly right up against the mailbox, back across into the soccer field, and then the soccer field's all torn up, and then there are marks where this vehicle exited. So I was like, must have had a drunk driver. Didn't rip the mailbox off. It just knocked it. Yep, knocked it sideways.
It's okay. All
and
right.
there's a lens, turn signal lens, brake lens, fully intact. And it was ripped off of the pickup truck, and I was like, huh. So anyway, a few days go by, and somebody shows up, this lady, and she brings her kid, teenage kid, who I guess was texting and driving, hit our mailbox. So like, no big deal, whatever. Like, all was good. She felt really bad. I was like, you know what? Nobody got hurt. Not a lot of property damage.
Oh, God.
You left your mark, that's for sure. Life goes on. So I kind of leave the mailbox. Well, then we get our first snowstorm, and boom, the plow goes by, hits it,
I knew.
and rips my mailbox off.
I love it.
All right, well, so I go and I get a bunch of like really big screws, and I drill this thing in from the sides, from the top, like it's going nowhere. A few snowstorms later, plow truck goes by, boom, all the letters get ripped
I
off.
love that part.
I'm like,
Oh,
all right.
gee.
So we go out, we buy new numbers, put the numbers on. Another snowstorm next winter, plow truck goes by, boom, rips the door off. I can't even find it. It's like buried in a snowdrift somewhere.
I love it.
So I end up getting a new mailbox, brand new mailbox, new letters. It looks great, crooked, but it looks great.
I know. Yeah.
And the numbers get ripped off. That was the end of last winter. So I go and I put new numbers on. I think I keep saying numbers. I put new numbers on, and so far it's okay. But we haven't had a real heavy
I
snow
know,
yet.
and I
But
love
it's
your
coming.
mailbox. It looks wonderful. It really
It's
does.
so
That's
crooked.
okay.
And I'm like, at this point, I could rip it out. I could pour new concrete. I could put like a steel I-beam from it's as big as the George Washington Bridge into the ground, and somehow that thing would wind up mangled.
It'll be flopped over for sure.
And so this is a metaphor for my life, because like every time you think you have things going okay, it gets you get knocked around.
You do. Yeah. It's
And
called life.
It is.
Yeah.
And so just since this new year, and this isn't even everything. So just since this new year, we had a death. Our first day back from going and visiting the in-laws, I went and visited a church member who was, she wasn't doing well. The next day, she passes away. The day after, and she's a good friend of ours, family friend. This was not just some person who died, and that's what I was talking about with you before. Like all these funerals that we preachers do, we're burying our friends. We're burying somebody's mother. We're burying somebody's grandma. We're burying somebody's loved one who happens to be a good friend of ours.
Right.
And so there are these different layers of grief. And the very next day, the woman who passed, her name is Ruth. Her daughter, who's one of our church members, has a birthday. One of her sons, who just turned 14, and he is the sole survivor. He's a twin, and his twin brother died when
At 13 weeks.
very
I
young,
think it
yeah,
was.
really
Yeah,
young.
about 13 weeks. Yeah.
a heart defect, and passed away. And so there's this added layer of grief and trauma for her.
Right.
Like, do we, and again, it's these questions: do I celebrate two birthdays or one?
Right.
How do I help my grieving son who just lost his grandma, but also is grieving the loss of his brother, who he never got to know?
But they say twins know.
Absolutely, they do.
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. There's another case, like I've been working with law enforcement, and speaking with survivors of horrific abuse. What else? I was like rattling these all off to you. Just spoke today to
the other family.
a family who is just in absolute disrepair. Just so much trauma, much trauma. And right before we started recording, I'm on the phone with a mom and dad who are sobbing. They can't even talk. They're
Right.
so
Their
upset.
whole lives have just been turned upside down in the matter of moments. To,
And
Today is Mike's
today
birthday.
is my brother's what should be his 50th birthday.
Right.
And so our family has our own
Grief.
grief as
Right.
we remember. And again, like, how do you celebrate that? You said this morning, and I
Yeah.
posted this on Facebook. I'm talking to her on the phone this morning. She said, I wonder what Mike would look like today.
I do. I wonder all the time. Yeah.
And the reality is, we'll never know.
No.
And that's a layer of grief.
It is. Really is. His children have all grown up in those 8 years he's been gone. So many changes in their family, in our extended family. You
And
know,
every time we celebrate as a family,
his presence, his
we
lack of presence.
feel his
is-
lack of
oh,
presence.
Yeah. Big time.
Period.
Big time.
Without
All
question.
the time. Right.
And,
Right.
and so there are all these different layers of grief. And you never know when the next bottom is going to drop out.
Right.
You never know when the next shoe is going to fall. You never know when there's going to be the next death or the next illness or the next
Or the
family
next
trauma.
trigger of something, because abuse, since we're talking about that, just is a trauma that is huge. And you experience waves of grief with that. You might think you've gone, a certain distance in your healing, and suddenly there's a smell or a sight or a sound that reminds you of this horrific trauma, and you're thrown to the curb again with your grief. And, it's hard. Life is just plain hard sometimes. All the time, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I want to read this post because I brought this up to you too. And you happen to see this. This was posted by a friend of mine, and
Right.
this is another one. Oh my goodness! If you knew the stories that I listened to in my office, and the heart ache and the heartbreak that's going on within
Right.
families, if you knew, well, you probably do know, because that's the point. Like, we all have this trauma. But anyway, this sweet, sweet lady posted this on behalf of a friend who she lost. And it's a GoFundMe. And I'm just going to read the GoFundMe. And this is not hers. It's a friend of hers. But this GoFundMe. Hello, everyone. It is with a heavy heart that I am creating this fundraiser. My stepdad, Ira, lost his son Zachary very unexpectedly. Zachary's family is shocked and devastated. As many of you know, I am in recovery. Zachary also struggled with addiction. He managed to get clean and was trying to create a better life for himself. Zachary was 32 years old. He was never married, but he had met the love of his life, Carolyn. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2021, and the grief became too much for him to bear.
Sure.
No parent ever expects to outlive their child, and due to the current state of the economy and the unexpected nature of his passing, Zachary's family can't afford to put him to rest. That's another layer of trauma.
It is, yeah.
As you can imagine, they are all devastated and grieving, and the thought of not being able to honor him and say a proper goodbye is even more devastating. Anything you can donate to help them is greatly appreciated, even if it's just a share. On and on
yeah.
and on and on. Those ripples don't ever
No, they
stop.
don't. No.
And grief is everywhere.
Right. And somehow we have to learn, in the midst of this crazy life and ongoing grief, how to swim in the sea without drowning.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part. And that's the part that Jimmy and I hope to help people with in the months to come with this course we're creating. I think that abuse creates its own level and own intensity of grief that combined with all the other just everyday griefs that we deal with just really brings a heavy load to people that sometimes they can't begin to explain to another what it feels like. I think desertion
Yeah.
by friends, being misunderstood by people, carrying the pain and guilt of abuse, of being abused, because often the survivor is told in some way this was your fault. If you hadn't been this way, if you hadn't done this,
Mm-hmm.
if you had reported sooner, if you, and on and on. And so you carry the guilt of that.
Mm-hmm.
And, the weight of the world is so heavy right now, I think, just without this, that we're left with the question, how do we survive? How do we get through this?
Yeah, I mean, and in addition to being told, whether it's explicitly or whether it's implied, whether in addition to being told it's your fault, then they get the added burden of, well, why don't you just move on? Well, how in the look at
Right.
this stuff. This is
Forgive,
real life.
move on, pick up with your life. That's in the past. Sometimes, and we're seeing mental breakdowns right now, we're seeing an overall mental health
Look at the murder
epidemic.
suicides that have been in the news.
Yeah,
Sarah McDougal has been
right.
posting post after post
Oh,
after
yeah,
post. These murder suicides,
right.
they're everywhere.
And it's frightening because people are getting to that point of where it's panic trauma along with
Mm-hmm.
loss of hope.
Yeah,
And when you get to that point, that's dangerous. It
yeah.
really, really is. So, we've kind of shifted gears this year because we want to offer you weekly hope through these podcasts. Life is hard, yes. Life is full of grief, yes. But also, we're surrounded by hope.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
we often lose that hope component, and that's when things get dangerously serious with this whole grief thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're seeing it in more and more people, like you said, Jimmy, every day.
Yeah.
Every day.
I mean, I trying to put this into words and articulate it right, because like I'm dealing with my own layers of grief and trauma, and learning how to process, and sometimes you don't even have time to, like, I haven't had time. This is all within 7 days, 8 days.
Right.
We've had I mean, just and this isn't even everything. Like, this is just a fraction. I've been working with a woman and her son who are homeless, a widow right now. They're living in a hotel. If you guys would see the living conditions and hear the story of how they wound up where they're at, it'll rip your heart out. And they're the most humble people, and I've loved spending time with them. And so I've been going over to the hotel, like,
Right.
I'm like, oh my goodness, it's like my son this morning. I was telling you, 7:45. I'm at the doctor's office, and he's getting stitches out for a surgery that he had last week,
Right.
a week ago today. And you know what I mean? Like, we're just constantly.
You must
We're
tell
constantly
the
moving.
grief of your two little boys, please.
Oh, yeah,
I
that's
think
another
it's
story.
it's
I'll share that in a
laughable
second.
and precious. It really is. At
I'll
the
share
same
that in a
time.
second.
Yes.
It's so
Yeah,
funny
it
and
is.
sad.
Yeah.
But
Aw.
so we're over there. We're at the oral surgeon, and he gets his stitches taken out. So I'm like, okay, here's this hat. Here I'm coming in, and like,
Yeah.
he had his surgery, and that all went great, and it was fine. Everything's gonna be good. But I'm like rushing over to school. Then I get back here. Then I have a phone call, and it's just like this incredible trauma that, I mean, just this deep, deep trauma. And then we jump on, and we're doing. It's time for live Q&A, and then we jump on, and then it's like time to record, and then I was emailing back and forth between this homeless woman this morning and a couple agencies in town. We're trying to get her transitioned,
Right.
and I want to read part of her email, not to expose anything, and I'm not going to give details or anything, but this is an idea to give you a glimpse into what other people are feeling. This isn't about me. Trust me, this isn't about me. I want to give you a glimpse. Whoo, these emails. They're stacked up in the
see
last
that.
hour.
Woo-woo.
So anyway, she replied back, there's some details about her circumstance. And then this last sentence got me. It got me hard. She said, Jimmy, I want you to know how much we appreciate your gracious kindness. We've had no one really seem to care. God bless you. That one got me. That one got
Yeah.
me. And I was like,
I
I'm just trying to squeeze in. Like, I feel bad because I can't squeeze in an hour visit
I
with them.
think you hit the nail on the head, and I think everyone listening can catch it. Grief and circumstances in life hit us often one right after another. It seemed uh, always, I used to hear, well, everything, bad stuff comes in threes. Well, the car breaks down, the washing machine breaks
Yeah.
down, and the kids come down with the flu.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. I think it comes in more than threes
I do
sometimes.
too. Oh, my
And
goodness, I
sometimes
do.
it's just one right after another.
Yeah.
We don't have time to process everything. And we're rushing from one thing to another to where we're breathless. As you're talking, you're pretty much out of breath.
Yeah.
Because that's how your life, the pace is going. As I've gotten older, my grief and hard experiences have not become less, nor have they become easier.
Yeah.
But what has happened to me is every day, and I don't care what happens, I really don't care what happens, I take a minimum of 1 hour to just do nothing but fun, whether
Yep.
it's listening to comedy on my iPad,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's listening to a meditation, whether it's just listening to soft music. But I've found that if I don't do that, I become so anxious and overwhelmed that I feel
Yeah.
like I'm going to crash, that I'm just going to break.
Yeah.
And then I can't process, I can't help another because inside I'm shattered.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens to a lot of people, including those who are struggling through the survivorship of abuse, that it takes years to process abuse. That doesn't
Yeah.
happen in a week or 2 weeks or an hour a day.
Yeah.
It's years to process what happened and then finally to eventually begin to let go of some of it. I found that this is year, 12, going on 13 since we found out about the abuse in our home. I'm beginning to forget on purpose certain details, and it's good.
Yeah.
I finally feel like I can let go of some of that, and as I see you kids begin to walk the steps of healing, I can let go of even more. So that's an important thing for us to remember that, yeah, we've started a new year. No, we didn't leave behind any of the hard stuff. That came right with us.
Oh,
And
with a vengeance.
yeah, it did. And the storm hasn't stopped. It's just
Yeah.
that wind is whirling and twirling and blowing and throwing more things at us. Job losses at an all-time high. Our economy is crazy right now here in the States. Sickness, this new variant of COVID is coming, and we're told, nobody knows what to do. There's long COVID that stays with you, which honestly, I wasn't diagnosed with COVID, but I think this cough is part of it that's lingering for months. But we have to somehow find that place of rest that
Yeah.
Jesus talked about so much. We have to.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that's what we really want to do too is like come from a place of experience and say like this isn't like we had grief past and we
No.
worked through it and
No,
and
it's
look where
still
we are now.
here. No.
Like grief is a constant companion in our
It
life.
is.
And it's like it is just beating the daylights out of us on a daily basis. But the other part of that is it's okay.
I know.
I think we've learned how to
you
embrace
need-
grief, and we're like,
yes,
all right.
we have to. Yes.
I quoted earlier from Forrest Gump. Life is like a box of chocolates, and you never know what you're gonna get. But probably my favorite scene in Forrest Gump is the scene with Lieutenant Dan when he gets up on the what's the basket called up on the mast of the boat, and the storm comes, and he's like, loses his mind, and he's like taunting it. He's like, "You call this a storm? Woohoo!" And he's like, loving it.
Yes.
He's loving it.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think like when I read stuff like this, like the GoFundMe, and I'm like, let me do a quick contrast here. Here you have somebody who lost his fiance, could not process the grief. He didn't know how to process the
Right.
grief. And I look at that, and now he's gone, and now both the fiancés are gone.
Right.
Here's a young couple that should be getting married.
And have
They're
all
now
the
both
joy
gone. Their
of being
family is
together.
grieving their
Right.
loss.
Right.
Here's somebody who could not process grief. And then here's Annie living in a hotel. And I'm telling you, it is, oh my goodness. They had everything stolen the other day. I walked in, they literally have nothing. Nothing. And so here's an elderly widow. And that was the beginning process, and it was a horrible death. It was cancer. Took him very slowly. It was a painful, awful death. So there's that layer of grief. And then, there's the default. We talk about the financial trauma and grief.
Exactly.
That leads to homelessness. They're out on the street since April this year. And then they have everything stolen out of their hotel room. So I'm in there, and here's this widow sitting crisscrossed applesauce on the bed because there's not a chair in this cheap hotel.
Right.
And so we bought her a camping chair, like a comfortable, like a nice camping chair.
Okay. Right.
And we're like, that way you can take it with you. If you end up bouncing around
Good
until you get
idea.
permanent housing,
Yeah,
you can
good
take it with you.
idea.
But
Right.
I was like, Annie, I can't stand to bear the thought of you sitting on the bed, and this is where you're confined, like no transportation. So on and on and on. So here's this story, both really horrific traumas and griefs within both families. And here somebody has hope. And she said,
Right, yeah.
and like,
Yes.
she sent me this big, and I didn't read the whole email, but she's like, for the first time in a really long time, she's like, I'm excited and I'm hopeful. And
That's
like
awesome.
we've
That's
got,
wonderful.
in the matter of a week, we've gotten to be, I feel like,
Yeah.
fairly decent friends. And we're asking, we're learning about each other's families, and
Right.
she got to meet my wife and kids, and and
Right.
so
Yeah.
there's grief is grief, and it beats all of us up. And what breaks my heart is that there are people like this young gentleman who overdoses
Felt so alone in his grief.
because he couldn't walk. He
Yeah.
didn't know how to process it. And
Right.
and so we want to help move people and embrace
Yes.
grief. And like, I go to this hotel room, and like, we're cracking jokes, and of course there are tears, but like, we're cracking jokes, and we're, like,
we need that.
it's a friendship.
Right. We do. We need that level of being lifted up out of the valley,
Yeah.
even if it's only momentarily for a few minutes every
Mm-hmm.
day, because that anchors us to hope. I
For
really
sure.
do
Yeah,
believe.
yeah, for sure.
Anchors us. Of course, when a person has faith, they will anchor to that also prayer. There are a number of ways, but that's what we hope to get into for this year, because we've realized in talking with every survivor of abuse, that's only one portion of their grief. They're carrying a whole lot of other griefs
Absolutely.
with them. Whole
Absolutely.
layers and layers and layers of this heavy stuff. So our hope and prayer for this year is helping you to unpeel these layers and kind of get rid of some of the layers of grief to make that burden just a little lighter.
I feel a political campaign coming on here. Hope and prayer Granny for president.
There. Oh, I like that. Oh, God.
I'm gonna run the. I'm gonna talk to. I don't know which party to contact because I don't know that you're like me. You don't really fit in any particular
No, I
political
don't.
party.
No.
But we're gonna contact somebody, and we're gonna make this a slogan and get bumper
Love
stickers
that.
and the
See
whole
that?
shebang. We're gonna start selling merch as part of the podcast.
There you go.
Hope and prayer, Granny for
For
president.
president. Isn't that awesome? Right up
So-
there with.
So Granny,
Yeah.
Granny wanted me to share the story of my kids' heartbreak. So this incident happened 2 nights ago now. In my home, right before bedtime, my children, my wonderful, dearly beloved children, decide they want to watch videos of when they first learned to read. We have videos of each of their
I think
first
that's so
first
special.
books that they read aloud. And so they fixated on my youngest son, who's 7, and they're watching the video, and it was the cutest thing in the world. And he was singing the
ABCs.
no, it's
probably?
the Mother
No.
Duck song.
Oh.
I can't really think of how it goes.
Nursery
Anyway,
rhyme.
yeah. So
Excuse me.
so not only is he reading the book, but he's singing it, and it's adorable. It's cute. We're all laughing, and then next thing I hear this, like audible, loud sobbing, and I look over, and my middle son, my middle child, my 9-year-old, is in absolute disarray, and he's just like full on breakdown. And we're like, buddy, what's wrong? And he goes, I'm just so sad. And I was like, what are you sad about? I was like, you don't think it's funny watching your little brother read? And he goes, I do, and that's the problem. I just want him to be so little again and to be cute.
I love that so much.
And so we're trying to calm him down. This is literally 5 minutes before lights
I
out.
love that.
So we're trying to calm him down, and we think we have him calmed down. I go down to fix my fire. We heat the house with a wood furnace, and I hear this loud sobbing from the 3rd floor of the house, all the way in the basement. And I was like, I thought somebody was like dying or something. So I run up the steps, and my daughter is like, hey, she's like, is that Cameron again? I was like, I think so. I go up, nope, it's not Cameron, it's my youngest. And I was like, what's wrong with you now? He's like, I'm so sad. I don't want to grow up. I just want to be 3 again. So it ends up we cannot calm him down. And it ended up with me having to like crawl into bed with him and pat him.
That's so cute.
My 7-year-old son. I had to pat him to go to sleep.
This brings up a point. It's adorable. It's cute. It is so cute. But kids grieve too, and we often forget that.
Apparently they grieve growing up.
They do. Honestly. Well, I think in their little minds they picture adults have these busy, crazy, hard lives, and when you're a kid, it's fun. It's just fun, and they don't want to leave that. But kids in families with abuse or with homelessness or with financial problems or with anger or with an alcoholic parent or a parent addicted to drugs, they grieve too. And we have to know how to pick up on that and help them.
You know what's
We
interesting?
really
You
do.
just made me think of something. I think I know what triggered this. This was before we dropped off things to the hotel.
Right.
But we went over to my wife's her workplace, and she hands me this bag of like brand new, really nice winter hats and gloves, and I mean nice.
Oh,
They're
nice,
like
yeah.
name brand, really nice. She said, "Do you know of anywhere where we can give these to somebody who needs them?" And she's like, one of my coworkers gave this to me. Her organization that she works for.
That's nice.
They had extras,
Yeah,
and just
that's really nice.
she didn't have a use for them. And so I'm kind of racking my brain. I was like, oh, so I asked the kids, I was like, do you know of anybody like at your school? And right away my kids were like, there are all kinds of kids that they can't afford. They can't, and they start telling me these heartbreaking stories
Yeah.
of kids that
I know.
go
Yeah.
without lunch because they
Right.
they can't afford lunch, or it's going to make mom or dad mad
Right.
if they
Yep.
order lunch or whatever. And so they start giving me, like, sharing all these heartbreaking stories of classmates, and I was like, oh my goodness. And so I happened to bump into the principal's wife at a baseball practice, and I was like,
Okay.
you think your husband would have a use for these hats and gloves? She's like, oh my goodness, yes. She's like, please send them with your son whenever he comes to
Yeah.
school, because she's like, we're the Eagles, and they call it an Eagle closet.
Oh, how
And
nice.
so
Okay.
it's a closet, and I never
Yeah.
knew this existed, but it's like this kind of, so there's not a stigma. They just call it the Eagle closet.
For
And so if
probably
anybody
teachers
forgot
who
a hat
donate.
or a
Okay,
coat or
right.
gloves or
That's
whatever, it's this
awesome.
closet where kids can
Nice.
get whatever. And
Yeah.
she was so grateful. And so I think maybe just that, it's that very thing. Like, my kids know that other kids don't have
They're
good home
hurting,
lives,
yeah.
or they have hard home
Your
lives.
kids are so well adjusted and happy all
Yeah,
the time.
they are.
have a
Except whenever they watch
they
cute
have a
little videos.
great life.
That's the trigger.
And it probably does grieve them seeing their friends who don't
Yeah.
have that. So,
Yeah.
we need to be aware that our kids go through hard times too. Even
Yeah.
young 6 and 7 and 9-year-old kids do.
Yep,
So,
for sure.
whole lot of stuff coming up. That's good stuff in the weeks to come.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think.
So I mean,
Yeah.
we're walking people through this journey, and like I said, grief is it's kind of our constant companion. We've shaken hands with grief. We certainly don't. We're not naive and think that grief
No.
isn't going to be a constant in our
No,
life.
it will be.
But
Yeah,
we've
with everyone. Yes.
yeah,
with
we've definitely
everyone.
embraced it, and
Yes.
we definitely want to help people walk through that journey. Because I just, like I said, that ripped my heart out to read the story of this young man
Oh yeah.
who's dead
And
at
that's
the age
just
of 32
one of
because of grief.
many who are feeling so hopeless right now in a world that is saying it's a hopeless world.
Yeah.
Sadly, we need
Yeah.
to change that around. We truly do.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, so yeah, we'll learn people, teach people how to walk through that process, and we talked about teaching people to become facilitators so that they can teach people how to walk through
Right.
the process of grief.
We need this. We need hope.
Yeah.
Without hope, we're
Hope and
lost.
prayer, Granny for president. You remember that? I'm telling you, that's going to be it's going to be
I
a bumper
like it.
sticker. That's going to be
I
offered
really
as
like
merch,
it.
only for our
Okay.
patrons. That's going to be offered as merch
Okay,
before
there
too
you
long.
go.
You mark my
I
words.
like that.
All right. Patrons, we love you. Listeners, we love you. Thank you for tuning into this episode, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. A special thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. Please help us get the word out by searching for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. Please consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron and check out the rewards our patrons receive.